Hey everybody, Diggs with a quick announcement. So I forgot to give out the Mao trays on the last video, and now I'm going to do it here. So we've got Swinla, Carlo Nell, and Blank. The three of you just need to shoot us an email at unitedlockpickers@gmail.com, and we'll get these out to you. Also, let me know if you like red, black, or blue, because I've got enough of each for all of you. And now on to Tumblr's video.
So this is the first video I'm making for the specifically for the Lockpickers United YouTube channel. I got to say I'm really excited about this channel and the folks who have started it up. It's just one of those times in history where there's just so much raw talent in one place doing one thing that it's just, honestly, it's very, very exciting. Some of the locks these guys are taking down is beyond anything I thought I'd see. F3D, Twin Star, Dom. So just amazing pickings happening on this channel. Anyway, I'm not here to pick a lock. I'm actually here to disassemble one, but I have to find it first. Okay, so these locks had been lost for a little while. Here we go. This is the Banham. Some debate about the name, but by most measures it seems to be an M2002. Anyway, this lock is something I picked on my channel quite some time ago, and it has pins that are drilled all the way, well, not pins, it has holes that are drilled all the way through the key, and then it has 12 directly opposed pins, and they move this way. So we're going to tear this down, get into it, and we'll see how it works, and then ultimately how to pick it. So if you're anything like me, you're going to twist this thing around in your hands for about 20 minutes and try to figure out how in the world to get it apart. I mean, there's no C-clip in here to remove. There's this pin, which holds this, it's probably a keyway protector in place, but that doesn't do anything. You can see I knocked that out. Anyway, eventually it all comes down to, and this makes sense, what's in this hole. But it turns out it's not just a matter of removing one screw. There's a couple of things in there in your way. So let's take those out. I'll show you how it works. So on top, there's one grub screw. Then there's another grub screw. So that first one's sort of a jam grub screw. And then there's another one here. And I've got a slightly magnetized screwdriver. And then you have this little pin which serves to lock the core in. Now, normally with locks you'd be afraid when you pull this out there's going to be pins flying everywhere. Not true here in this case. It's just going to come out and everything stays put together because it's all integral. We'll pull this clip out and then we'll start getting into disassembly. But for now, it's really just a very thin body on the Euro cylinder into which this integral core fits. And again, that locking happens right there. That pin fits right into that little hole, locking it and preventing it from being forced. So that's a fairly beefy, and you can start to understand why that pin exists. It's a fairly beefy thing to prevent forcing. So we're done with this part. Again, there's not too much interesting. The actuator gets interfaced with back here. All right, so getting back to the core, you can start to see in here how the pins come up against the shear line, which is really just the interface between this inner and outer sleeve. Again, we have holes going all the way through the key, and inside we have pins that oppose each other like this and touch each other, okay? And so you might conclude that you're not going to get in there with any tool to move things around, but like everything in lockpicking, it all comes down to tolerance, and in fact we can. There's not enough accuracy in these parts to prevent a very thin piece of metal in between those two things from being able to effectively pick it. So to get into this, to move on to the next step, we have to remove this little retainer clip, at which point we can put the key in, turn it, and this inner sleeve will slide out. However, we're going to have to be very, very careful because there's a relatively elaborate system of pins in here. You can kind of just make out this donut style system where there's this, it's going to be hard to see in this, we'll see it later. There's like a donut in there, a retaining donut that holds a spring. And everything wants to spring out, like out from the core. So we have to go very slow, removing one pin at a time, or two pins at a time because they're directly opposed, before we got it apart. So you saw me pull all of the spring and pin assemblies out of this core. There is a mushroom shape at the end of those pins, and then there's a flange that is in the bottom of each of these holes. Hopefully you can make that out. That prevents them going too far. Now this little donut that sits on top prevents the pins from coming out. So in other words, that flange cannot exceed that mushroom, the flange around that mushroom part can't protrude through here, but the tip of it can, and then it can't protrude through this little donut. So each of these spring pin donut assemblies constitute a discrete object, which is then captured inside of this core. All right, so we're in just about as far as I can go, and the point here is to get a real detail view of these pins and how they work. You can see this flange here that's on the edge of this mushroom. Obviously that prevents the pin pushing out further into the core and becoming loose. Stops it there. And then of course these donuts up here, which also have a flange, you can see there, that nests in so that everything settles evenly. So that's this goes towards the inside of the core, so the assembly goes together just like that. Well, imagine this is flipped up like that. Yeah. So that's captured. Everything's captured and it's even. So obviously what you have here is you're using this to exert spring pressure in. So all of these pins are trying to drive themselves in. And what that'll mean is one of them protrudes out past the shear line and the other one either doesn't or is right at the shear line. So the exercise of picking this lock is not to find the bound pin. If you find the bound pin, what you found is the one that's protruding past the shear line. And let's say you pick it, you move it. Well, you've just pushed it further into the shear line. So that's not how you approach picking this lock. It's a reverse picking operation. And what that means is you need to go into the lock, find the binder, just as you would normally. But let's say this one's bound. Get in there with as thin a tool as possible and push on its partner while just, I'm going to call it tapping the tension, or really it's a very slight bouncing on the tension. You need to go between almost zero tension and very, very little tension. And that will allow, as this one moves out of the way, that'll allow the spring pressure on this pin to very slowly work its way out, and eventually you'll feel, like any other lock, you'll feel a set. Sometimes you can hear it. I've heard folks say it's easier to hear than it is to see, or I'm sorry, to feel. So that's the assembly. That's how they're put together. Be very careful taking these apart. It's very easy to lose these donuts. They like to pop right out of there, and they're pretty small. So hopefully this video was interesting. Hopefully you learned something about a very cool lock. And Thanks for watching.